Monday, everybody, and welcome back to the Couchside Judges. I'm Scott Fontana. Follow me on Twitter at Scott_Fontana.
And I'm Dan Urban. Follow me at The Dan Urban. Follow the podcast at Couchside Judges. And subscribe to us wherever you listen.
And I know you're going to like this show, so when you're done, or even during it, make sure you give us that 5-star review.
And as always, we taught judging in MMA, so head on over to abcboxing.com to read the criteria.
Dan, we have a special one, because it's always special when we have our good friend, Spencer Kyte, on the show. Spencer! He's flexing for us. You won't see us because this is audio only, but Spencer, it is wonderful to have you back. It's just awesome to have you back, man. How are you doing?
I'm good, boys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we dive into everything, I always like to make sure we give our guests, the chance to kind of shout out their work, shout out what they're up to. So Spencer, I mean, you got the floor really quick. What's kind of going on in your space?
In my space,
no, not on my space, your space. My space is not used anymore. That's old.
In my space, the Keyboard Kimura newsletter, spencerkyte.substack.com, UFC.com website, doing a ton of stuff there, especially this month with 5 events in the Ultimate Fighter and the return of Dana White's Contender Series at the end of the month. Then mid-year awards will be coming out this week, like busy weeks there. I've been doing a bunch of stuff with the guys over at Severe MMA as of late, doing the weekly preview show. So shout out to those guys. But as always, all of it will be shamelessly self-promoted on social media at Spencer Kyte on both Twitter and Instagram. So just follow those and you will get all of the goings on.
There you go. No shame, sir.
Excellent. Yeah.
Always promote your work. Absolutely.
And video content is new.
Video content is new. Dan asked for video predictions. I gave him a little sample a couple weeks back. Got the pick horribly wrong, but it was a good video. And
no, it's a bad video. Don't do it anymore. If you got it wrong, you can't do it again. No, that's cool. That's cool. I'm glad to see you branching out. I'm always glad to see your work pop up, and I'm a big believer in your work. So I'm glad to have you back on on our show. Last time we had you for contested rounds, where we of course go over the rounds from the most recent event. That was actually one of our best episodes because it happened to have 2 fights that people still bring up as like potential robberies. They're wrong, but they are fights that people distinctly remember, and they go back to that episode. And that was the one that was headlined by Corey Sandhagen, who did not get the win against TJ Dillashaw last year. That was a great episode.
It was fun. I enjoyed it. I mean, this is a thing that judging is a thing, maybe not as passionate as you guys or as Sean Sheehan, my good buddy at Severe, but I've gone through the course. You mentioned not that long ago, like people can look up that their names are on the ABC website, and I did, and was like, hey, look, my name's there. And so this is something I enjoy and get wrapped into every once in a while. So
well, our names are going to go up there in a couple weeks if we pass the tests at the ABC in a couple weeks. We'll see. I come in with humility. I come in willing to learn from whoever is going to impart knowledge upon myself and Dan. Dan is all ego. He has no will to listen to anybody.
It's true.
No. We're gonna have a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it. Any tips real quick, Spencer, before we kind of get into the weekend?
Just don't get yourself psyched out. You guys know your stuff. You know what they're looking for. You understand the criteria. So when you get through, I mean, I don't know if it'll be the exact same tests that I had to do, and it's tests.
Been a long time,
plural.
Right? How long ago?
Yeah, it's over a decade ago now, because I'm old. I really actually want to re-up and probably do Mark Goddard's course just to go through that as well, just to familiarize myself and
just
the
online course.
See what everybody else is doing these days.
Yeah. No, it's a shame you're not going to be able to join us out there. That would have been fun to see you.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
Look, just drop your life and go. Come on.
Getting back to the old stomping grounds, and born and raised in the Niagara region, but on the other side.
Right.
Familiar with the area. It would be nice to get home, but little bit of things going on here that we need to take care of first.
Of course.
One of
Well,
these days.
but you know what, Dan, it's probably time for us to get into this.
Yeah,
Right? We got a lot of stuff to talk about. Not even as much rounds, but like I feel like there was a lot of stories that kind of came out of UFC 276 on Saturday. So even though it wasn't the main event, I think, at least in my opinion, this was the star attraction going into the event, and I think it probably left as the biggest real talking point coming out of it, and that was Alexander Volkanovski just laying into Max Holloway in the end of their trilogy. Which, you know, how unlikely is it that we're going to get 2-0 and there's another fight between these two guys? But, you know, if you only knew that, I think it's not surprising in the least that the guy who won the first two absolutely tore through the guy he'd already beat twice in Max Holloway. But obviously we know better. We know that these are two of the best fighters, not just ever in their division, but like still currently in their division. There's no question that these were 1 and 2 at featherweight. And Volkanovski didn't really pay attention to that. He absolutely just blasted through in 5 rounds. I mean, he couldn't put him away, but man, he left Max in a bloody way. What was your initial reaction as you're watching this, Spencer?
I mean, kind of what you said, right? Like you look at the first 2 fights and they're the 1A and the 1B, and it's really close. The first 2 fights, both really close. I think everybody agreed that Volkanovski won the belt the first time around. I think still debated whether he did enough to retain in the second fight. And so the expectation all week was that these guys are so close that it's going to be another tight contest. And then Volk goes out and shows kind of what I had thought was going to be the way this played out, that he had leveled up. He just looked so much better coming off those wins over Brian Ortega and Chan Sung Jung, that he went out there with a different kind of confidence, a different kind of almost self-assuredness, and just took the fight to Max in a different way than he had in the previous 2 battles. And Max just wasn't able to keep up. He wasn't able to make the adjustments. You saw him clearly getting frustrated in terms of, you know, deviating from the things that he does best. And Volk was just loving it for 25 minutes. He was yapping at him in there. He's kind of looking over at the commentary side a little bit. Like, he was having fun in there, proving that he is now, I don't want to say head and shoulders, but at least a full head above Max Holloway. Like, he has put some distance between himself and the rest of the pack in that division right now. And it was, I mean, to me, he's, you know, we can get into whether he's the best fighter on the planet right now, but he's got to be on that really short list.
I mean, I think you're right. I don't want to get too deep into the pound for pound discussion because it's just so fantasy. And I think everyone else is going to beat it to death, right? It's today, if they haven't already. This 4th of July when people are listening to this episode. But Dan, what about you? I mean, what did you take away from the fight?
I was like, wow, he's really good. And Max is not a guy you typically do that against. And he went out there, like Spencer said, and he showed that, you know, he's the better fighter. He took it to him, and he leveled up from the previous fight. Even from in April, he's a better fighter.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. And obviously against a higher caliber of opponent, no disrespect to the Korean Zombie. I think we all know Max Holloway is a different breed of fighter than Korean Zombie is. But obviously Volkanovski, you know, he said after the fight, he wants 2 belts. When I spoke to him a couple months ago, and I don't think I was the first person he talked to about this, he's made no secret that he would like to get that lightweight belt as well. His whole spin is he doesn't think that the featherweight division can keep him busy enough. He's also talking about he broke part of his hand, so I don't know how busy he's going to be with fights for the next few months while he recovers that hand. But having said that, do you want Dan Volkanovski to get the next lightweight title shot?
Well, here's the thing: if they're dead set on making Islam versus Dariush before just giving Islam the title shot, which it kind of feels like they are, then I think if they're not going to give Volk a shot at the 55 title, then they're never going to. So if not now, when? I think 45 and 55 are kind of in weird places. Like, there's no clear-cut contenders that haven't already had their shot. Like, 45 has guys that are surging that will be contending soon. They're just not at that level yet, like Josh Emmett, Arnold Allen, Bryce Mitchell. And 55 is weird, too, because they've already, you know, like I said Islam's going to fight Dariush. So if it's not Islam, then there's really no one there that hasn't already had their chance to fight Charles. So
what do you think, Spencer?
I want it for Volk because he's such a good dude, and I want him to get those opportunities. But for the division, for where things are, I mean, I disagree with the notion that he's cleaned out the division. I think there are those guys that, Dan mentioned this young pack that's surging. Arnold Allen, Mobsari Vloyev, Bryce Mitchell, maybe a step behind them. But you've also got Josh Emmett, who just, was in a grueling battle against Calvin Kattar. And if you want, you guys did a good job covering that decision and covering those rounds. But he got the victory. It is on paper as a victory. He moves forward. He's looked good in his last 5 fights. And then we've got a fight pretty close to you boys in a couple of weeks.
It's not that close to us.
Dude, it's not that far away either,
it's
man.
Very far.
I'm driving to it. It's not far.
Know better. I knew better than to say that, having listened to the shows. I knew better than to instigate that. But I mean, I think if Yair Rodriguez goes out and looks really good against Brian Ortega, you can make the case that you give Yair a shot. Like, I know it's only 1 win, but he's a guy that's been in that mix. We just saw Jared Cannonier off 2 wins get an opportunity at middleweight. And so to me, there's more for him to do, and there's more opportunities for him still at featherweight. Plus, we've got enough people at lightweight already. We don't need more really great fighters at lightweight.
I hate to just separate one of the best fighters just because there's enough there, because what if he is the best? I certainly wouldn't want to deny him just based on the numbers, you know what I mean? That's me. But yeah, I understand why there's a lot of hesitance to kind of put him in there. Personally, if I'm Mick Maynard, I get to do whatever I want. If I'm Sean Shelby, I get to do whatever I want with these divisions. I'm making the fight between Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev. I'm just making it happen. I don't care. I don't think that they're in a rush to do that, and I think they probably even see a little bit more appeal in getting Volkanovski up there than they do in putting Islam Makhachev in there. I don't know why. They seem to like guys until they absolutely don't, for one reason or another. They turn down a fight at the last minute or what have you. It's very it's very I guess double-sided. I don't know the way the UFC kind of does things, but you talk about Yair and the chance that he might have to get that next title shot at 145 with a win. I think you're right, because as complicated as the relationship's been with the UFC and him for the last few years, there was a point where they kind of cut him, right? Like they sort of did, but then they didn't. I don't know. It was a weird thing. There obviously is a reason that they like him, and that's because he can open up more doors in Mexico, possibly even that Brandon Moreno cannot, because he is like very much like an exciting striker that I think can cross over with a different type of audience in Latin America and especially Mexico, because he's all about the striking, whereas Brandon Moreno, he's he can kind of do a little bit of everything, but I think he bread and butter wise is more of a grappler, and I don't know how much that translates to the audience down there. So I think they would love for Yair to get there, as complicated as it is, so I could see him definitely getting that next shot if he wins. But yeah, I mean, it all depends, I guess, on that hand, right?
Yeah, if that hand's busted, like if he's going to need, I mean, we see Kamaru Usman, right? He hasn't fought because he broke his hand last time out. It's been a number of months since he fought. And so if Volkanovski's going to be sidelined for, let's say, 6 to 9 months dealing with a hand injury, you've got enough time to maybe get whoever wins this fight in a couple of weeks on Long Island in there against Josh Emmett. You get the young guys that are on the rise, kind of that one fight that each of them need, and see if one of them can make another statement and have another big performance. And then maybe you've got a couple different contenders sitting there for when Volk's healthy. You move forward at lightweight, as you said, with Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev, who are both very much deserving of being in that championship matchup. And then you're set going into kind of either early next year or the second half of next year.
I would also say, because I believe it was Aaron Bronstead who kind of floated the idea that you couldn't rule out the possibility that the UFC would consider a lightweight championship fight that didn't involve Charles Oliveira, and that one I wouldn't put it past the UFC. But man, if they do that, I ain't buying it. I'm not buying it whatsoever. That'd be in poor taste.
Dana said he's the guy.
Yeah, I mean it's got to be
So,
right. It has to be. But
he's basically the champ.
well, you know, we've seen changes in mind before, right?
I was unaware about this hand thing for Volkanovski.
Yeah, no,
I
he
didn't
had said
know
it, I
that.
guess, coming out of the cage last night,
Okay.
and then they asked him about it at the press conference, and he said he believes he broke it in the second round. He's almost positive because he said he's broken it in like the same place before, kind of on this spot in the right hand.
So that makes me think that he's going to be out a little while. He won't get that third fight this year that you told me that he was hoping for.
You never know. I mean, if he's wrong, maybe he gets back in there.
But
right?
so now it makes me feel like he's not going to get that shot for the second belt, because by then 45 should shake out a little bit more. We'd have a better landscape and have more contenders ready to go there.
One would think so. What about Max Holloway though, Dan? I mean, Max Holloway is no, without question he's the number 2 guy at featherweight, but he is never going to get another shot at Alexander Volkanovski again unless he somehow has the belt himself and Volk is challenging again. That's like the only way I could see it. Or if it's like somewhere at lightweight, and again, same kind of scenario, right? These are the only things that I can see them two happening. So he's basically blocked. What do you do with him?
Interim titles do happen way too often.
I mean, they do. I'll grant you that, but
I really don't know what to do with Max. It's kind of whatever he wants to do, really. If he wants to go play video games and just stream,
I think he really wants to fight, though, dude. I think he does. He's playing Apex Legends a lot. He told me when I talked to him. Yeah,
wherever he wants to do. I mean, I'm down for Max Holloway to do whatever he wants. If he wants to go fight at lightweight, if he wants to fight at featherweight, fight who? I don't know. I don't know where to match him up. Really, it's kind of hard.
I think I'm in the time to move to lightweight camp. You know, give it a real try. That's where I'm at. What about you, Spencer?
I'm in the take a whole bunch of time off and just hang out with your new wife and your dope son and play video games and enjoy living in Hawaii.
But he kind of did that. He's been out of action for a bit.
I mean, the fight with Yair was in November, right? Like he was November, December. So I mean, it's not that long. He's coming off another hellacious beating. He's 30 years old, but he's been doing this for a decade. And the last 7 fights, I think, are 25-minute battles at the top of the division where, yep, he won a bunch of those, but he's still taking a bunch of shots. And so at a certain point, you know, you start thinking about those things. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised.
You're right.
Yeah, even in that Cater fight, he took a lot.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he took the rest of the year off and then gives him time that if he does want to go to 55, which I think if he's coming back and he does want to fight, 55 is the thing that makes absolute sense, right? He said for the fight with Poirier, he didn't do it the right way because he knew he was still competing at 45. Take the next 6 months, 7 months, whatever it is, put on some mass, get up there in a real way, and then go up and see what's up. I mean, there's fights up there that, of course, we all would love to see them. But I also kind of echo my co-host on the Next Day Takeaways thoughts, Harry Powell, who said, you know, wouldn't mind seeing Max retire. Like he's got nothing else to prove. There's nothing for him at 45. It's not like there aren't more of these kinds of fights at 55. So he's just going up there to get into more of these fights because that's who he is. And so at what point does he say, you know what, I've made my money. My legacy is established. I'm just going to hang out.
You know, I could see what you're saying there, but I wouldn't necessarily say that he has nothing left to prove. I mean, he does in a sense, but I think for someone like him, who really is a fighter's fighter, right? Like he's not in this just for money. I think he really likes to fight. So, you know, regardless of when he comes back, maybe he does take the year off. Maybe he takes a full 12 months off. I don't know. But when he does come back, and assuming he's going to, I doubt he's going to just walk away off of this, but I think he would find a lot of interest in trying his hand for real at lightweight. I do think that is something to prove for himself because he did go up there the one time. He did lose. He does think he can do better. So there is something to prove, I think, for this man. I think there's really something there. Can he do it? Because he does have a lot of wear, like we're talking about. I mean, there is the question, but I could see him being highly motivated to do something that there is a lot of questions about, and he wouldn't want to just walk away from without kind of seeing that through, right? That's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly matchups, there's certainly opportunities, and I agree that there are questions that he will have for himself that he would like to answer at 55 if he can make a real go of it. There's just that part of me that, you know, looks at that landscape and goes, does it get that much better for him up there? Like, It's kind
I
of
don't
like
disagree.
it's kind of like when Kevin Holland said, "Oh, well, I'm going to go down to welterweight." It's like, well, there's wrestlers at welterweight, dude. There's dudes that are just going to take you down at It's not like they disappear. And for Max, you go up there, it's going to be Dustin Poirier, it's going to be Michael Chandler and Justin Gaethje, and dudes that are going to engage you in car crash fights.
What if you do McGregor Holloway?
I mean, that I would
the
be
rematch
I
that
would be
everyone's been waiting
interested
for.
in.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
interesting. And what about that Khabib fight that we were supposed to have? Because I have a press pass that says Khabib versus Max on it, and I didn't ever see that fight. I went to the arena and everything, and it wasn't there.
Max would need to go up several weight classes to fight Khabib now.
Yeah, maybe eat some burger cheese, right? Several burger cheese.
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously I think we can move on. We've got a few more things we want to hit before we get to contested rounds. But moving on to the headliner here, which didn't necessarily thrill everyone who was watching it. And it was Israel Adesanya getting the win over Jared Cannonier. 5 rounds, no question who won. But we've kind of seen this type of fight, I guess, from Israel Adesanya before. The tactical 5-round clear victory that maybe doesn't wow everybody. What was your takeaway from this fight, Dan?
We've seen this happen before.
I steal your thunder. I said it
in a past generation with.
Oh yeah, okay.
With GSP, towards the end, GSP took less risks and he just took the path of least resistance. Did what he was best at, focused on his strengths, and actually we really focused on his opponent's weaknesses because he beat up Koscheck pretty good with a jab.
He went at everybody. He identified their weak point. He kind of took the Death Star route and said, okay, there's that 2-meter wide hole that if we shoot it through, we can win. And that's what GSP would always find, that 2-meter wide hole, and just shoot it through. Use the force.
Yeah, so Adesanya, I think he did what he had to do. He had to avoid getting knocked out, getting hurt. He avoided the power from Cannonier, and he won a pretty clear decision. I mean, the further you get, the bigger the risk gets when you lose. So
the only thing I would actually push back on is I did see some aggression from him, especially on the earlier rounds. I think he was really taking, I don't want to say risks, but he was definitely trying to do things more than just wait, which I liked to see. And I think the later part of the fight, we didn't see that as much. And I think that's what kind of resonated a bit because it probably just went a little longer than people hoped. But I think it was even Daniel Cormier who was remarking during the second round. He's like, oh, we're seeing a more aggressive Israel Adesanya in this fight. I'm like, you know what? I think we actually are, because he was looking for that. He's looking for straight punches, jabs, that kind of thing. He's trying to get it through, and he didn't really have to. Like, these were stiffer ones and not just kind of feel her out, right? He's going for strikes that you didn't always see him. There was the leg kicks that we see, but there was more of that, and I appreciated that from him. I think probably some of the criticism he's getting in the aftermath of the fight is undue. The one thing I would say is most definitely he sets the bar to a certain level, and he doesn't really get in the cage and meet it to that degree. And there's going to come criticism as a result, because when you walk out like the Undertaker, you do the whole Undertaker walkout, and you have an urn with you, and it says Jared on it. People are expecting you to bury your opponent and burn him up and fry him up and put him in an urn. And that didn't come close to happening. So the meeting of expectations, he fell way short. And I think that's part of the problem that I can justify other people having. But otherwise, I thought it was a fine performance. So what about you, Spencer?
Yeah, I think the first 2 rounds, as you said, were actually active rounds where we saw good things from Israel, and we saw him looking to set up combinations and looking for shots that he doesn't necessarily always chase, and he had good success. We'll talk about the 3rd round a little later, and I think from there on he kind of not coasted, but Cannonier did a good job of making him work in some spots that he doesn't like to work in or can't be as successful in. And then the other part of it is what you said at the end. He goes out at the press conference and says, I want to be the show. I want to be the guy headlining these things. I want to be the main event of International Fight Week. He has the tremendous walkout. And the expectation is, because we've seen it at times, right? This is the trouble. It's similar to what Dan was saying about George St. Pierre. We saw it a little bit even with Anderson Silva in his career. You have those great moments. So we know we've seen the Paulo Costa knockout. We've seen the Robert Whittaker knockout on repeat throughout this ascension. And so that just becomes the expectation because we know he's capable of it. The thing that's always interesting to me, and Harry and I got into it today on our show, is that there's just this weird, to me, it's a weird imbalance because it's all on Izzy to go out there and just put everything on the line to chase down Jared Cannonier and get him out of there. But if he does and he gets caught, nobody is saying, good on Izzy for trying. At least he went out there and tried to give us our money's worth. He just gave up everything. He just lost everything. But
That's totally
and so
fair.
I completely understand where he's coming from. And like, look, sometimes you have an off night. The trouble for him is that he's had a few off nights. And so that just becomes the new narrative, right? Is that he says all this stuff and then he goes out there and he has these off nights. And so it's weird to see people walking out before the end of a championship fight. But I was here in Vancouver when people left very early in the Demetrius Johnson Ali Bagatinov fight. And so it happens.
You know, looking at his record, looking at Adesanya's record, because we've seen a lot of decisions from him lately to kind of crystallize the actual number for you. Going back to 2019, start of 2019, when he fought Anderson Silva and that kind of like co-main became the main event because the title fight fell apart above him. He has had decisions in 7 of his last 9 fights, and that includes the loss up at light heavyweight. So I think what it is we really need to start adjusting the expectations that we have from Israel Adesanya, is he's not going to give you spectacular finishes quite regularly. I think the man that fought Robert Whittaker was a very different man that night when he knocked him out that first fight. And I think Paulo Costa he's the type of strange fighter that's going to leave a lot of openings and make it easier to get that finish. But outside of kind of, a really special night from him, a really jazzed up night from Israel Adesanya, or the right opponent who's just going to leave a lot of open, I think we have to expect that he's probably going to win these tactical decisions. It's going to be, there's almost, and I'm not coming up with an original thought because Floyd Mayweather's name has been bandied about a lot since the end of that fight. And I could see why, because we do have a very tactical ahead of his opponent's fighter who just is so much better, but he's also not going to take too many risks because he knows that there's a lot of value in just winning, like you're talking about, Spencer. So
I mean, but he's also the dude that went out there and stood across from Calvin Gastelum at the start of the 5th round and said, "Not tonight, I'm ready to die." Right?
Sure.
So like, yes, that's a decision. And so we kind of lose sight of those every once in a while, right? The second fight was Whittaker.
That's a hungrier Israel Adesanya, who had not been the champion yet. He's tasted victory. He's tasted championship glory, and I think there's a difference after
maybe,
you win,
but he also had a guy that was pushing him, right?
Sure.
The first fight with Whittaker is a beautiful knockout because Rob makes mistakes. Rob is chasing throughout that fight and putting himself in terrible positions against a guy who is an expert counter striker. Paulo Costa stands there and allows Izzy to snipe on him. The guys that actually get in and like fight him the way you would think you should fight him, it becomes these fights where they're tactical and they're this way. Calvin Gastelum has success because he creates chaos in that fight. He goes out there and he accepts that I'm going to get hit and it's going to suck and he's going to knock me down and I'm going to bleed, but I'm going to try to get mine off. And if I land, it's going to be effective.
Sure.
I agree with what you're saying about there being some hunger there, but like we've still seen good performances from him since he's been champion. It's just that those expectations, to me, all of this is about expectation. And I think the thing I said with Harry on our show is that expectations have just continually, they're always growing. There's no point where we settle, where we just sit and go, this is good and I'm happy here, right? It's always just the next thing. And so Izzy has a brilliant walkout and he has some great performances and we just want that every time. And to me, it's unrealistic.
Sure. But yeah, I think probably at some point we need to get something from him, right? I think that's kind of where a lot of people are at. It's like, all right, it's been a little bit, right?
I think people just expect him to be Anderson Silva.
But that's another thing. There's a lot of people who just see that, right? And he is who he is. He's Israel Adesanya. He is not Anderson Silva. No one else is. And I think we do probably have to hold him to the standard of who he is and not who we want him to be, right? Even though there are so many similarities that it's really hard to ignore. But again, they're different people, and I think we can appreciate. I think we're going to appreciate Israel Adesanya's body of work one day more than his individual performances. In the same way we do GSP, who GSP, of course, we can appreciate the individual performances too, but you look back, it's the body of work when you talk about Georges St-Pierre. That's his legacy, is he fought the best of the best all the time, and no one could really beat him in a way that he couldn't beat them the next time out, right? Or 2 times out in the case of Matt Hughes. But let's think about this fight that's obviously going to be coming up now, and it's Alex Pereira got the win over Sean Strickland in let's say maybe not a great strategic move from Strickland to just engage and follow along and play into every single little mini game that was being thrown at him by Pereira. But beyond that fight, this fight it's going to be Adesanya and Pereira. We know that, right? What's your level of interest, Dan? What do you think of this fight compared to like some of the previous ones?
Middleweight desperately needs something to breathe some life into it. This is a built-in storyline, and it'll give some excitement to a division that desperately needs it. So
I think also we're going to get a good fight out of it too. I think because there's going to be 2 high-level strikers here that have familiarity with each other, there's going to be a lot less of the, well, gee, how do I approach this? And then, if it didn't work out, like, what do I do now? These 2 know each other very well. They know how to play this particular game against one another. So it could end up being a very interesting tactical battle. Even if it's not like setting the roof on fire, I think it's going to be a much more interesting one and engaging one. There's going to be a lot of tension, I think. And that's something that was missing from this fight and probably some of the other most recent fights that he's had. Maybe, Whitaker, there was at least some kind of sense that Whitaker was in the fight. But I think we all, maybe not all, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I had a good sense of who was the better fighter even after the second fight. This one, there's some question there, unless Adesanya, and I don't want to go too deep into tactics. That fight's coming up, and whenever it is, we'll talk about it then. But I could see Adesanya mixing in the martial arts. What do you think, Spencer?
That's what I was going to say. Izzy has made a point throughout talking about this of saying that was kickboxing, this is MMA, and it leads me to think, and he's talked a great deal about wanting to get a submission finish in the UFC and show people some of the grappling that he's worked on. I would not at all be surprised if we saw Izzy look to clinch, if we saw Izzy look to wrestle, if we saw Izzy look to mix the martial arts as opposed to just go out there and strike. And look, even if they do just strike, I think it's going to be, I think the word you used I think tense is the right word. That's the thing for me that even in these tactical battles can keep me hooked, is that tension where it's like, what, this guy's still in it, what's going to happen, that little anxiety of what's going to take place,
a little bit edge of your seat type thing.
And with those 2 dudes, I think from minute 0 until it ends, there will be that tension.
I think you're right. Absolutely right. I don't think we have to go too deep into this one, right? But we can move on. Just a couple more things before we get to contested rounds here. We had 2 retirements on this card. We do not get a whole lot of them. We got 2 of them here. Donald Cerrone, of course, was the more notable of the 2. Came on ABC. He's the bigger name, of course. And then Jessica Ai, earlier in the card, also took off the gloves, and she has decided to move on from MMA as well. Dan, what was your takeaway, especially when it came to Cerrone? The fact that he actually did retire here, and he didn't really leave any indication that this was definitely what he was going to do.
Good for him. Yeah. He found another passion that in acting, it seems, and
he lost the passion here.
If he says he doesn't love fighting anymore, then he shouldn't fight. So
I agree.
He's done enough. He's got nothing to prove. Legend.
You got a favorite memory?
So, a lot. Like when he knocked out Melvin Gillard, or dropped him and said, "I'm not going to keep punching my friend. I'll just submit him." Mm-hmm. I thought that was kind of him in a strange way. Or him going against Nate Diaz with a broken jaw because he got kicked by a horse 2 weeks before it and still showed up to fight night. So
typical fighting injury. That's just how it goes. Sometimes you find a horse, and we've all seen John Wick 3, right? Like this is the type of thing that happens. So what about you, Spencer? What's especially with Cerrone? And then we can come back to Jessica Ai if you have any thoughts on her too.
So I got to write a piece today or Sunday for UFC.com about Cerrone hanging him up. He's a guy that I've had a ton of experience with, both talking to him ahead of fights, but also spending an inordinate amount of time with him at events, and have been at. He's Donald Cerrone. He fought 38 times in the UFC. I turned up at a few of those. My favorite memories are, there's a ton from in the cage. Dan mentioned the Melvin Gillard fight, the Edson Barbosa fight. The Street Fighter combo on Rick's story is always going to be
That's-
up there.
Oh,
that
yeah.
was mine.
Going home to Denver for the 25th anniversary show and submitting Mike Perry was a really great moment for him because he was coming off a couple losses. But I mean, I have things like hanging out with him on a football field with the Ottawa Red Blacks where he's just showing people how to do stuff. And a couple days before he gets in a fist fight with Pat Cote, right? And goes out and wrestles Pat Cote. But 2 days earlier, he's talking about going bungee jumping and throwing around a football with a CFL team. Same weekend, I had a great conversation with his beloved grandmother who told me she's very mad at Donald, and she calls him Donald, and it's wonderful every time she says it. She's very mad at Donald for turning the middle finger into a sign of a greeting instead of what it's supposed to be, because that's how Cowboy greets you. If he knows you, he just gives you one of these and then a little smile and a smirk. And so I walked over to where they were to say hello and good to see you and say hi to Grandma Jerry again, because lovely lady.
I've met her once. She was very nice.
Yeah, wonderful woman. And Donald gives me the cowboy salute, and I just start laughing. And she says, I'm really mad at Donald for that. And it was just the best, just the best. So shouts to Grandma Jerry, shouts to Donald.
She's a
Cerrone.
listener, dude. She's definitely listening.
I hope that this sticks. I hope that acting really takes off and all the other ventures that he has. I know he's racing cars and got his own fight series and things like that. So I hope this sticks. Hang out with the boys, hang out with Linz. All the best to you, man, and thank you for the memories.
Absolutely. Anyone have any quick thoughts on Jessica Ai either? I mean, she wasn't by any means a UFC legend or anything like that, but she lasted a long time in the UFC, always fought the toughest opponents, at least for me. I remember her as always fighting against the toughest women who were out there, right? She somehow was able to kind of just survive. Her record is not impressive if you just look at the numbers. I think she's 5-10 in the UFC.
5-10 with one no contest.
With one no contest, which realistically would have been a win over it was Sarah Kaufman, right? Who just retired herself.
Right, who just retired as well.
Shout out to her as well, and you especially, right? Being fellow Canadian, I'm sure you're a big fan of hers or a big supporter of hers.
Lived
right?
in Victoria, trained at Zuma a little bit. Know Sarah quite well. Shouts to her for the retirement. But yeah, the Jessica Ai thing is exactly what you said. Fought up a division when the UFC didn't have flyweight and fought tough competition, then goes down to flyweight, earns her way to a championship opportunity, and unfortunately the highlight of her career is being on someone else's.
It belongs to someone else, exactly. Yeah. That is just the way. But you know what? Thank you very much, of course, for all of the efforts and everything out there. I think anybody who was able to give us that many fights deserves some props, right?
Oh, for sure.
And I mean, we're always going to have the "Here we go, evil" chant.
Yes, here we go, evil. That's right. Goodness. Dan, this one's especially for you, sir. Jim Miller. You may have heard of him before.
I know that guy.
He may have grappled with you before and beaten the snot out of you, right?
Maybe.
More or less. Do you think that his job is now secure, having beaten Donald Cerrone here on a 3-fight win streak, 3 finishes?
I mean,
because he wants to get to UFC 300, of course, and I think he even told me the other day this is what UFC 300 would be what he thinks is his last fight. He thinks that would be where he wants to hang it up. Figures maybe 4 to 6 fights in there. So is the goodwill enough to just carry him on regardless of results?
It better be. I mean, if you want, it's for some reason.
It's entirely up to him.
For some reason, something happens where the UFC is like, nah, you're done. We're not re-upping you. For some reason, they do that, which would be insane to me. He can go easily win $1 million at PFL or go easily win the Bellator 55 title. It's really, he should be in the UFC, but he has options.
I think it would be harder than you're selling it, Mr. Jim Miller fanboy here. But yeah, I mean, I have to think that it would be very hard to justify cutting bait with him short of some sort of character-related, legal-related thing, which, knowing Jim Miller as long as we have, Dan, does not, and Spencer too, Spencer's shaking his head, that does not sound like the Jim Miller that we know. So I would be absolutely stunned if he didn't get to that point where he could get to UFC 300. He loses 5 or 6 fights in a row. I don't think it really matters. I think he'll still get there. We've seen fighters. Jessica Ai, like I said, she's 5-10.
Sam Alvey.
Sam. Oh goodness, Sam Alvey. I don't want to pile on Sam Alvey right now, but like, if we could keep Sam Alvey on the roster, we can keep Jim Miller on the roster, right? I mean, am I wrong, Spencer?
No, you're right. And I mean, like you said, I don't think legal issues or character issues are a thing that are going to crop up with James Andrew Miller. It's 2.5 years. That's the tricky part. Right?
2 years. 2 years. It'll be UFC 300. It'll be exactly 2 months, 2 years from like this weekend.
24 pay-per-views away. So, I mean, he's getting up there. I'm older than him, as I remind him every time we talk, and I mention his age. But you know, to be able to have that has always been the thing that's been the thing he's gunning for the last couple of years. You mentioned that he thinks it would be his retirement. He and I have talked about it a bunch. He wants the pageantry. He wants everybody to know it's his last fight. He wants the flowers. He wants the send-off.
And he deserves them.
And he deserves it. What better way to do it? I mean, he's got the most. He's one ahead of Andrei Arlovsky. Arlovsky will pull back into a tie for most appearances whenever he fights next. But he's the leader in wins. He's been doing, like, as Dan said, he should be in the UFC.
And I've said
I don't know that he necessarily goes and cruises in PFL or Bellator the way that your co-host thinks, but
especially if you're making him fight 4 times a year now in this advanced age.
He wants it.
Getting up for 4 fights and
he wants more fights.
I know he wants more fights, but can the body handle it? I think he knows the body still can't handle it as well as he would like it to.
He's making up for lost time that Lyme cost him.
I think you're right. So. I don't disagree there. But yeah, I think it would be really the one thing I wanted to point out too is the fact that I've said this a few times in the lead up. He has more UFC fights than years on this planet, and I'm pretty sure he's the only fighter in UFC history to have ever done that, because how would anyone else gotten to like 35 fights before they were like 36 or something like that? It's really just him. I don't think Cowboy got there. I double checked on Cowboy. He was the only one I was not sure about. Arlovsky's older. He's not. He isn't quite there.
Jeremy Horn.
Jeremy Horn didn't have that many UFC fights. I'm talking about UFC fights. Yeah. No, I mean, there's Travis Fulton, who of course has some other complications there. He, to put it mildly, he has like 200 fights, 300 fights, something like that. And hopefully he's locked up for a while based on the crimes.
Khabib has 300 fights too. He let everyone know that. Yeah,
that's true. And I mean, once we start getting into like the Gracie conversation, then it goes all over the place, right? So let's stay away from that. Last thing before we kind of move in here, and this was a very extended start of the show because we just don't have that many contested rounds. There's not a whole lot of things that people are going crazy about, so it's a little easier to kind of get through that sequence, I think. But biggest winner outside of the individuals we've already spoken about off of this card. Let's start with you, Dan.
Jalen Turner.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm with you.
I think he's in a position to really ascend into contender status.
I think so too. I've had my eye on him for a while, and literally every time he fights and he gets announced, I forget that he is fighting out of Fontana, California. And I'm like, oh, I hear my name. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Same thing with Bobby Green. Same exact thing happens. I'm like, oh, wow, I keep hearing my name in there. But yeah, he's absolutely the biggest winner. He did it in a very big spot right before the pay-per-view started in the featured prelim. Just go out there and just like totally run through Brad Riddell the way he did with the wins that he's starting to pile up. I think he is absolutely ready to bust out. So yeah, he's definitely my biggest winner too. What do you think, Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, just to add some variety, I would go with Ian Gary.
Sure.
24-year-old kid, 10th fight, good performance, exactly what he needs, exactly what he wants. Go out there and get some more cage time. Keep moving forward. We're seeing the development. We're seeing the progress. He showed all the things you wanted to see from a kid that is expected to do great things down the road. Goes out and gets a good win, keeps it moving forward. We'll see how long he can continue the I just want to go slow track, because at some point the UFC is going to be like, listen, man, we need to return to Ireland at some point, and we need you to be on that card fighting somebody of note.
Sure. And absolutely. I mean, that's a good point. We've seen Tom Aspinall kind of wanted to take that slower route, and I think he didn't even really want to go to the point of fighting an Alexander Volkov last time, and obviously he proved he could do it. I think he's too talented for his own good in that sense, and I think we may see that from Ian Gary. We're not there yet, but you're right. That could be something that manifests itself. And props to you, by the way, for variety's sake, giving us another name, because I bet you would have said Jalen Turner as well, wouldn't you?
Oh, I'll mention Jalen Turner later. Don't you worry.
I'm sure. So yeah, let's move on to contested rounds. Again, there was only 5 of them. They're all from different fights. We had no split decisions, so there was no round from this entire weekend that had any bearing on the result as it ended up playing out, which is always great, right? But we're still a judging show. We got to talk about these rounds. We got to talk about things because we get the scorecards now. The UFC puts them out there. We see them. We wonder, hey, what's going on with these rounds? So let's start with the one that I really think this is the only one that I saw anybody kind of talking about in the sense of like, well, what's going on with this one, right? And that's Pedro Munhoz versus Sean O'Malley. Fight gets declared a no contest, as we all saw. Eye poke in round 2. And it was most definitely a very damaging eye poke, as we found out a day later, for all the doubters that were just not sure about the degree to which this eye poke was. He suffered a corneal abrasion, I believe, is the injury.
Ooh.
And his eye is basically swollen shut. There was a picture posted with him and Glover Teixeira, and his eye was all closed up. It's ugly. It doesn't look good. Reed Harris was also tweeting about it. He was kind of shutting down all the doubters and that kind of thing. So anyone who's doubting the man, lay off. You get poked in the eye and see how you do, right? But let's talk about this first round because we did have a full round that was scored. Dan, what happens in this round?
Bit of a strange round, I'd say.
Yeah, a lot of breaks, right?
O'Malley seemed, not overly aggressive, somewhat cautious. Neither guy's really throwing any punches. This seemed to be a mostly kicking round from both. O'Malley checked a few of the low kicks, as DC pointed out, the whole round, basically. But I thought Munhoz landed some solid ones in there. And the volume on O'Malley's side, like I said, very low. The big spin kicks to the body, which I don't think landed too cleanly. I think those were the hardest shots he threw in the entire round. A lower output of high impact shots, if that makes sense.
No, I get you.
I'm not upset with a score for O'Malley, but I'm on the Munhoz side, 10-9.
Yeah, I also am on the Munhoz 10-9 track here. I do think that it is a closer round than I think a lot of people kind of wanted to think it was coming out of it. The problem is, I think when we're watching on social media, especially people who follow the fights every week, right? And we put our scores up there and all that. I think there can end up being kind of this group think that if I saw it the same way and you saw it the same way, well, then that has to be the way it is. And I don't know that's necessarily the case all the time. I think a lot of times we end up seeing it the same way, even though it's just close. We kind of ended up landing there and it's close, but I think we know that's the better score. This is one of those rounds to me where and especially when you have breaks in the round, when you've got 2 breaks in the round, it throws off the timing of everybody. And if you're sitting at home, do you get distracted? Are you that good at being able to remember all the events that happened early in the round, middle of the round, end of the round? 5 minutes is a long time. Stretch it out to 6, 7, gets even harder. So I'm definitely sympathetic to Judge Sal D'Amato here, who had it for O'Malley. Even though I do think Munhoz is the better scorer, I can understand a lot of reasons why he would get there. And so I just don't think this is that big a deal. I think there's a lot of hubbub over nothing. Not that people are going crazy, but again, it's definitely the one people pointed to. So you and I, Dan, sided with Mike Bell and Doug Crosby. What about you, Spencer? Did you see it that way too?
Yeah, I did. I think just in terms of, as Dan said, and it really was the right way to put it, a low volume of high impact strikes. The leg kicks to me are the most effective throughout. They're the most kind of immediately impactful. O'Malley does a couple good things, has a couple good shots here and there, but on the whole, it's to me a Pedro Munhoz round, and what made the fight really interesting going forward. And unfortunately, it ended the way it did. But I think we'll see it again.
Yeah, I think we got that round covered. What about the next round here? I think that we should go with Bryan Barberena. This is the one that I thought was kind of interesting in terms of just the theory behind why you scored. Bryan Barberena got the win over Robbie Lawler, round 2 TKO. Really turned it around in kind of the middle part end of the round, and absolutely really put it on Robbie Lawler there. It was like, man, is he even winning this round? And then, okay, he's definitely winning this round. Oh, he won the fight. But round 1 there's an argument to be made, I think, for either guy in some sense. But I want Dan to set this up and why I think that might be the case.
Yeah, such a close round. The first minute, and only the first minute of this fight, is a bit of a feeling out process. And they felt out each other pretty quickly because they just started slinging leather. Once Lawler, he eats a couple leg shots in the first minute, but then he starts turning it on in the fight. It's just awesome at this point. They're both rock'em sock'em robots. It feels like Lawler's avoiding some of the shots coming back from Barberena, but he stumbles Barberena back against the cage a few times when he was landing his shots. Barberena was throwing a lot of strikes. Like, if this was the video game, it wouldn't even be possible to throw these strikes because your energy bar would just be completely depleted.
That's a whole nother conversation I could get into, why I don't like the UFC video game, but anyway.
14 punch combos. I don't think many of them are getting through, or at least with high impact the way that Lawler's are, because every time, like I said, he hits him, Barberena's getting, backed into the cage. He hurts him pretty good that one time, probably about halfway through. I think the immediate impact's definitely on Lawler's side, even if he's not landing as many strikes as Barberena is. So I'm 10-9 Lawler.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the impact is what you're really looking for. Impact, immediately is more. It's weighted heavier than the cumulative effect here. But there is a lot of like, when is the volume enough? Is kind of what you start to say. Is like, okay, how much volume does it need to overcome the immediate kind of thing? Because we don't see Barberena necessarily hurt, right? He's not hurt. He's getting tagged. He's getting his head turned. There's definitely shots that are landing.
Well, I thought he definitely got hurt probably like halfway through.
But how badly is he hurt compared to, like, let's say when we started to see the fight really turn in round 2, where Lawler was the one hurt? I think we started to see a different degree of hurt there compared to the round. Well, that's at least how I saw it.
Okay.
Maybe you disagree.
I mean, I don't think he was on the verge of losing.
Right. Exactly. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. It's like it's not turning the fight, in a downward direction for him. It's just like, oh yeah, he's definitely winning, right, in those exchanges. But we did see a lot of volume for Barberena. I did think a lot of them were getting deflected, right?
So I think that's like, yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I made it a lot easier for me to say, okay, Lawler really ought to be the one winning this. But if you're at a certain angle at the cage and you think some of these shots, if it looks to you that they are landing, you can understand why maybe Ron McCarthy is able to get to the point where he says, okay, I'm going to give this round to Barberena. I think he did enough here. Maybe he's not seeing how impactful the shots are from Robbie. You just never know. A fight like this, it gets very tricky, I think. So I saw it the same way as you for Robbie Lawler. Derek Cleary, Adelaide Bird had it the same way as you and I did. What about you, Spencer? Did you also land on that way, or did you go with Barberena?
I went with Lawler, but even watching it live the first time, I thought it was a Robbie Lawler round, but a fight that was favoring Brian Barberena, if that makes any sense to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Lawler did the more, as you guys noted, more impactful blows, more immediate damage. But in terms of that volume and in terms of that pace, I looked at it and was like, all right, as long as Bam Bam doesn't get put out here, this is all good. All of that body work is going to pay dividends. All of those little short elbows in close are going to pay dividends. And we saw that where we got to the second round and they just, picked right back up where they were at the end of the first, slinging leather. And then it sort of turned and became a fight that favored Brian Barberena. But the first round to me was a Robbie Lawler round, and it comes down to damage.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably the right score. But it's not one of those rounds where you're just like, come on, how did Ron McCarthy get there? Like, you can totally see the path to it. And that's why it's not a round I think anyone should get kind of crazy about. And nobody was that I saw. Nobody reasonable. Anyway.
For sure. And you asked the question, like, at what point does the volume kind of outweigh the immediate impact? And I think that's a thing that, I want to keep thinking about, and I want to keep watching with some of these fights, because we get these fights at this level now that can be this close, where, Robbie Lawler lands the one or two most impactful blows. But Brian Barberena is right there in it with them, and he's outlanding them by a good number or whatever it is. So it's going to be a thing that I think it's a discussion we will certainly have going forward, because it feels like we're trending right now towards right but damage. And absolutely, damage is primary criteria, immediate impact over cumulative, as you have, like, exactly correct. But it doesn't mean we just go all the way away from volume for, well, that guy landed one good shot and he landed 15 that were less impactful immediately. It's going to be interesting to see as we get to this balance, and hopefully you guys ask that question when you get to Niagara Falls later this month.
It's true. It definitely should be at the top of our list right there. I think we should put it up there. We
Mhm.
should probably make like a list, you and
Yeah.
I, of like things that we want to make sure we like get asked while we're up there. Not that we
I
can't
would have
reach these
assumed
people
you would
anyway.
already have like a spreadsheet or something, dude.
But you know what it is we're kind of in touch with a lot of people, so we can kind of just get our questions in as
There
they
you
come.
go.
So it is different when you're kind of speaking with
Big
someone in
time.
person. So, but yeah, I think we can move on. We still got 3 more rounds here. Let's go to Miller and Cerrone again. This was ending in the second round. It was that guillotine choke where basically Cerrone's arms were both trapped and he couldn't really go anywhere, so he's like tapping with like the ends of his fingers, which was such a crazy visual. And it was just like, wow, that is like a double arm in a sense, right? Is because he just can't do anything with any part of his body. He could probably barely verbally tap. But what happens in round 1? Kind of before, obviously, this is round 2. What's happening in round 1, Dan? Why are we talking about this round?
On the feet, I think it's a Cerrone round until it hits the ground. I mean, Cerrone's having good success with his front kick. He seems to be landing the better shots to the head. Miller's attacking the legs pretty good, throwing a couple body kicks, but he can never really break through the guard of Cerrone when he was attacking the head. But once it hits the ground, I think it's all Miller. He's landing good ground and pound there. Ends up in mount, lands some really solid punches there, but Jim Miller is finish first mentality. Tries to jump on a triangle, just attacks with no regard for any consequences, as if it's just 100%. I'm going to get this.
That is very much on brand.
So. Ends up on the bottom, but even on the bottom, he's doing all the offense. He's landing elbows from there, tacking an arm bar at the end. Kind of got caught kind of a loose knee bar to end the round, but 10-9 Miller.
He was kind of shaking his head about that. He's like, no, it's not there. And usually you see when you see that in like the striking game, it's like, no, it didn't land, it didn't hurt, and you're like, oh no, it did. I think with a submission, you're usually like, no, it's not there. It's pretty matter of fact at that point. You actually take it, right? So yeah, I actually saw it the same way as you, but I could see why, because we do have more or less half a round where I do think Cerrone is probably winning the battle up there. He's winning on the feet. But I do think that ultimately when they get down, that's where we are seeing that more effective strikes, effective offense in general is up there. But close enough round. I'm not crazy about it. What about you, Spencer?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, I score for Miller, but if you go the other way, I'm not super upset with you. This isn't an egregious decision or an egregious round by any stretch.
No.
I liked the elbows from Jim Miller. I liked the attacking offense once they got to the ground, and even as Dan mentioned, off his back when Cowboy was able to get to top position. Still effective, still being active, still landing the blows in there. And so for me, it was 10-9 Miller. It was close, but 10-9 Miller.
So judges that we agreed with, the 3 of us, we were on the same page with Mike Bell and Sal D'Amato. It was the lone Cerrone score came from Anthony Maness, who's a Tennessee-based judge who's been out in Vegas a lot more often in the last few years. I think he's more of a recent kind of hire. And I should highlight him just because of the sense that a lot of people are getting very tired when I talk about this on social media. I hear a lot of people saying, we're just tired of the same, these lifetime appointment judges with Sal D'Amato and Chris Lee. It's like, well, look, Anthony Maness is a new judge. Like, I don't know if anybody's formed an opinion on the guy yet or not. And I'm not saying anybody should, because I don't think you've seen enough of him. There's not even, for my data that I track, I don't even have enough results to formulate whether he has been really that much in agreement or disagreement with his fellow officials to whatever rate that a lot of them are. It's hard to say, but I have seen some more disagreements, I guess, in general than I have in step from this judge. But I feel like a lot of people would just say like, no, throw him away. We got to do the next one if it's that kind of thing. You need patience, and you need to also understand that if you don't like Sal D'Amato, you might get in a new judge who is less experienced, who is not going to be able to give you kind of the consistent results that you think you're going to get with someone else. It's probably going to be less so until they get more experience.
Or be used to the 10,000 photographers fighting you for position.
That's right. Nobody has the boxing out elbow for his spot at cage side like Sal D'Amato does. I think we saw that it was Hawaii, right? It was Hawaii when that happened.
Well, that's when he
Bellator.
He grabbed the cameraman.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm saying boxing out, but that's exactly what I meant. Thank you. 2 more rounds here. We got going all the way to the title fight again. Adesanya He won 49-46 twice and a 50-45. So we do have one split round here, and that is round 3, the middle frame that Spencer alluded to earlier. Dan, what's happened in this round?
Another close round, as most of these usually are.
They often are.
Yeah. Izzy landing the better strikes early. Solid leg kicks. The jabs are snapping the head back of Cannonier. Cannonier's right hand is finding a home. He lands in especially a big one when he's kind of stuck in a clinch, which pushes Izzy all the way against the fence. I think he does some good work here in the clinch. Once they separate, I think it's Izzy, again, winning the striking, albeit not by that much. Cannonier again lands another right, and they get into a second clinching situation here. And this is where I think he probably wins the round because he's landing some solid knees, a few Storley knees mixed in, but mostly solid knees here. And I think he wins this one in the clinch. That's where he wins it for me, 10-9.
So look, I want to preface by saying I also agreed that this was a Cannonier round 10-9, but I would also point out that those knees that are being thrown by Cannonier are happening directly in front of Sal D'Amato, who did score the round for Israel Adesanya. So no one in the arena had a better view of those particular strikes and a better feel for how they might be landing, except for the two individuals who were in the action, and maybe referee Herb Dean too. But there's no one who I would trust more to evaluate those strikes than Sal D'Amato here. And if he is sitting there and he says, that's not enough to turn the fight, I understand it. I totally get it. And I don't think anybody should doubt that because it makes a lot of sense to me. What do you think, Dan?
I think that's a great point.
What about you, Spencer?
From my perspective, they look pretty good. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agreed. I kind of was with you. I was leaning that way, but then I kind of went over with those. So it felt a little bit better. But again, it's hard to sit here and say that I know better than Sal D'Amato in that particular situation, right, Spencer?
I mean, who can say they're better than Sal D'Amato, really? But I mean, to me, again, this is the same as these other rounds. It's a close round, and if you go sort of the other way, if you are the dissenting voice in this, I understand where it comes from. I like Dan scored it for Cannonier. I thought the couple shots closing the distance and in the clinch in terms of the right hands were the most impactful kind of blows of the round, and then everything else is relatively close. So the clinch work where he's, able to get off a little bit more than Izzy was kind of sways it a little bit. But this is one of those rounds, like this isn't a runaway round for Jared Cannonier. This is like, if we're scoring it out of 100, this is like 55-45. It's one of those kind of close rounds where everybody's getting a little bit of their stuff off, and it's just a little more in favor of Cannonier in my books.
Sure. The unfortunate part here is, of course, that Adesanya had won the first 2 rounds. No one was really questioning that because he actually looked pretty good to this point in the fight, right? Through at least 10 minutes. And then if you give that round to Adesanya, the fight is essentially over, barring some sort of, high damage situation. It's not even a grappling. It's usually a high damage situation at this point to get the 10-8. So the fight is essentially over. Now, judges aren't sitting there saying, am I going to get over that path? They're just saying what happened in 5 minutes, right? But it's definitely a tricky thing because there's definitely a lot of value to this round and making sure you get the right person. But it's up to individuals in the cage to really distance themselves, and neither one of them really did that. And that's really the crux of the issue, I think.
Yeah, and it was one of those fights that, and I know Luke Thomas was talking about it live as it was happening, that because those last sort of 3 rounds were relatively low output, were relatively low volume, and generally pretty close, it felt like there was the opportunity, depending on how those scores are coming out, that we could be looking at some janky scorecards or some scorecards that are going to stir some debate. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
We didn't get that. I think Izzy was able to do enough and be effective enough over the last 2 rounds to rightfully get the decision. But that's the other piece of this that's tricky, right? Is like they're individual 5-minute segments. If there's not a lot happening, it doesn't really take a lot to sway around the other way. And if that happens 3 times, we have a different outcome.
And that's where, and I don't want to get sidetracked by an open scoring situation, but I do feel like that's where it's kind of useful. It's really useful for a fighter to know where they stand, not because it would do anything for the judging itself to help the fight get on the right page, and we talk about this ad nauseum on our show, but to at least let the fighter know, hey, listen, you've already lost 3 out of the first 4 rounds. You can't win a decision. It's round 5. Jared, if you want to win this fight, you're going to have to press. Because we didn't see a lot of urgency in round 5, and I don't know if he knew where he was in the fight. It didn't seem like he thought he was winning or his corner thought he was winning. But at the same time, if you know, hey, you're 5 minutes away from losing potentially your last chance at being a champion in the UFC, maybe he fights differently. Maybe he's got a chance in there. And I don't know that Adesanya would fight not to lose round 5, because I think he's got a lot riding on also being perceived as kind of a killer. And if he goes out there and let's say he knows that he is winning and all he has to do is survive, if he goes out and fights like all he's going to do is survive, it's definitely going to have a much more negative effect than I think we already saw in the aftermath of this fight, right? So that's why I feel like it would definitely be a useful tool. There's faults, absolutely. I'm not one who's going to sit there and tell the anti open scoring people that no, you're absolutely wrong. I see both sides, but this is a fight I could have seen some real interest in having it there. That's just how I feel. I don't know how anybody else feels. We don't have to get sidetracked in that because that can go down a rabbit hole, right? But yeah. Anyway, before we even answer me, unless anyone has something they really want to quick say, we got one more round. And Spencer's shaking his head no. I think Dan's probably okay with just getting into this last round, right? Macy Barber, Jessica Ai in her finale. It was, of course, a decision win, unanimous for Macy Barber, 2 29-28 and a 30-27 with round 2, our swing round. So, Dan, what is happening?
Right out the gate, Barber lands a big right, and then they end up in a clinch situation and pretty much stay there. They both, they swap position. Who's in control? Landed a couple knees and punches from both. Jessica Ai really wants a takedown badly. It's not really panning out. Barber lands a head kick, which helps Ai actually get the takedown that she's been trying for the entire round. I didn't think the head kick was all that great. And from there, again, they don't do much. Ai's really focused on the grappling. She just wants to pass. She's not really doing anything in terms of ground and pound. Barber's not doing anything in terms of escaping. I think it gets interesting in the final 30 seconds when Ai actually starts to throw some punches and elbows to the body. And I think it was too close up until that point that I thought that swayed it for. So I went Jessica Ai 10-9.
So I've been the one who's kind of following up with Dan, and this is our last round. I'm going to let Spencer have the floor here because I know he actually is going to push back a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to push back a little bit because I think what Macy Barber did in the first, it's not really the first 4 minutes and 30 seconds because she wasn't landing offense throughout that entire period. But I think the things that she did earlier, including that right hand right out of the gate, I don't think the head kick was super effective either, but there were a few other elbows and short shots, knees to the body inside during that long stretch where Jessica Ai is just desperate to get a takedown and stand in the clinch and just press into Macy Barber was enough for me. Absolutely, Jessica Ai finds some success and starts, letting loose a little more towards the end of the round. But for me, I was already over to the Barber side of things.
Yeah, so was I, honestly, Spencer. I'm with you here. It didn't feel like Jessica Ai had done enough to take this round. Ultimately, it just really didn't seem like, even in that last kind of sequence, like you're talking about, the last 30 seconds or so, Dan, it just didn't seem like that was enough to overcome the fact that there were things that Macy Barber did in that round that I think were useful, were good. I don't want to sit here and say that Sal D'Amato and Ron McCarthy, who were the majority judges, had saw it for Ai the same way as you. I don't want to sit there and say they can't evaluate a full 5-minute round. They're better at that than me. I have ADHD, and I don't think I'd be a great judge if I sat cage side. I just don't, knowing myself. But I feel like there is a sense of undervalued impact happening in the early part of this round compared to what happened in the later part of the round. And I do think that's why this really ought to be a Macy Barber round. But I'm not worked up about it by any stretch. Neither one of them did a whole lot. Anytime you have these low impact, heavy on, clinching and grappling without advancement and without offense, you're asking for trouble as far as, is it going to be scored one way or the other? So I have no sympathy for this going one way or the other, right?
Yeah, I guess you guys saw it differently than me as terms of what was happening in the clinch. I thought really the only strike that mattered or was effective on Barber's part was that opening right. I didn't really see much in the clinch, and that's probably why I sided with I.
Fair enough. That's just
So-
fair enough. But then Spencer and I ended up seeing it the same way as Adelaide Bird. So this is not a couchside override. Unfortunately, the guests do not sway our couchside overrides. I'm sorry, Spencer. It's not the way it works. Maybe it's like a guest override. We're not going to do a sound effect. It's just not
I
going
was
to
going
happen.
to say, I'm not getting any sound effects this episode. Come on.
I can't do it. I'm sorry, sir. Maybe one day I'll come up with a noise that'll be maybe less impressive than the noise that I only do when we have it. So I'm not even repeat it, but oh well, it is what it is. Let's that is it though. That's all the contested rounds we had. We got 5 finishes on this pay-per-view. 3 of them submissions. 2 of them were TKO. Well, one was a KO, one was a TKO. It's it's just a distinction. It doesn't really make a difference. But we don't see a whole lot of more subs than strike-based finishes. That's always fun. 3 of these ended in the first round too. So Spencer, what was your favorite?
Mine was Jalen Turner. I mean, we
talked
mentioned him
about that
earlier.
guy, yeah.
We mentioned him a little earlier as having the biggest kind of breakout performance and the guy that made the best showing for himself. I mean, sitting before the fight on a stream with my partner in crime, Harry Powell, we were talking about it, and I said, "What do you like? How do you think this plays out?" And he literally gave me the step by step of what actually happened. And to go out there and do that to Brad Riddell, to get a 5th straight finish, to be 100% finishing rate. He's an absolute menace in this division, and I cannot wait to see where he goes from here, because at his size, learning how to use his reach, learning how to use his power with the instincts he has when he has somebody hurt, he's really interesting to me going forward, and this was a terrific finish.
Super intriguing fighter. I completely agree with you, and I'm very interested to see where he goes. Dan, I have no idea what you would pick as your favorite finish.
Yeah,
what would it be?
It would have been Jalen Turner's had this one not happened.
Sure.
Jim Miller, reckless abandon somewhat, just diving on guillotines like nobody's business and getting the finish.
What was great, he basically got it down there because he ate a head kick and Cerrone slipped and then he pounced. So it was like, what?
Hey, just
these things happen in MMA.
Just go for it. What an animal.
Yeah, absolutely. I probably would have said that too if it wasn't for the fact that I knew without question this was yours. I wasn't going to steal your thunder because I'm a buddy like that. But honestly, I felt really good picking Alex Pereira, getting the win over Sean Strickland in half a round. Just what the heck was Sean Strickland doing? What were you thinking? He's like, oh yeah, there's no one I can't stand with, these glory kickboxers. Da, da, da. But like, he's in there and he's reacting to everything, every single thing that's happening. He's playing directly into the champion kickboxer's hands. He's not trying to do anything to change it up. And look, if he wants to, if what he wants to do is just test himself as a man, test himself as a fighter, see how he does there, okay, fine. Look where it got you. I mean, you were 1 win from a championship fight that you had already done a weirdly good job at hyping at the press conference the other day. And I say weirdly because, good God, the things that come out of his mouth, like, it's just, I don't really love to repeat them because I don't really subscribe to some of the stuff he says. But not for nothing, he reached a certain audience of mixed martial arts fans. All he had to do was just fight smart, and he couldn't do it. Just one more fight, just fight smart, and he couldn't get there. So, but Pereira looked...
Bet Eric Nixick loved that.
What's that?
Bet Eric Nixick loved that.
Yeah, maybe. But no, it's just... It is what it is. But as far as Pereira goes, he looked absolutely fantastic. He showed the world exactly why he would be a very interesting matchup for Israel Adesanya. So that really hyped me up. I was very interested in that one. I was glad to see it. That is it for UFC 276. Before we go, because this is only UFC weekend as far as the major North America promotions. Vegas, they're back in Vegas. It's just numbered card number 58 at Vegas, whatever number. I think it's 58. That's what I wrote down at my house, so hopefully that's what it is. And it's the Battle of the Rafaels, or Rafaels, as it were. Rafael Dos Anjos and Rafael Fiziev, headlining at 155 pounds. Spencer, do you like this fight? Like, I know you like every fight, right? You like a lot of fights, but this one, like, where does this stand for you? Are you getting extra excited, or is this kind of like, okay, this is a decent main event?
No, I'm really excited. I mean, I had the pleasure of talking to both guys this past week for stories that'll be up on the UFC website.
Which you should go read.
Thank you. Dos Anjos is a guy that, great performance against Renato Moicano earlier this year, has been a champion in this division, believes he's capable of getting there again. Certainly interested in seeing him attempt to do that. And I think this is the kind of test that Rafael Fiziev needs at this point. He's a very charming and endearing personality when you talk to him. He's super interesting to watch in the cage in terms of what he does. And to me, this is a fight that's going to help kind of clarify where things stand and where everybody kind of lines up in the lightweight hierarchy. And we need fights like this. And so I'm all for it. I want to see Fiziev over 5 rounds. If it gets there, I want to see kind of whether he can keep up that pace if we get to that point. And so for me, I'm all in on this fight, and not just because I like every fight.
That's true. My understanding though is it's Rafael Fiziev and Rafael Dos Anjos, right?
Yeah, but it's way more fun to say the battle of the Rafaels or the Rafaels.
But
neither of them went for it when I asked them if they would be proud to be the number 1 Rafael in the lightweight division.
That's a shame.
Both just no-sold me.
That's terrible. Because I feel like that would be a lot of fun if they added like an element to this, like almost like a bet where the winner for a year can enforce the loser to pronounce their name the other way. That would just be fun.
Just a little cup on it that says Rafael, like one of those little, trophy store, get it engraved yourself trophies.
Or at least one of them should come to the cage wearing a red bandana and carrying size.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, dude, I don't know how much you know about me, Spencer, but I am a massive Ninja Turtles fan. So, this is what I need. And if you haven't, I don't know if you're a gamer at all, but if you haven't played, and I told Dan to play it, I don't think he's even got it yet. Go get Shredder's Revenge, TMNT Shredder's Revenge. It is fantastic. Throwback action. Dan, what are your thoughts in going into this fight? I don't know if you have a pick or if you
no pick. I'm kind of really I'm very interested to see where Dos Anjos is after all these years. Where's he stand?
Do you think that he's got another title run in him?
I don't know. That's what I think. This fight will tell me.
Okay, I think that's probably fair. This is of course in Nevada. We will have the same high degree of traveling judges and local Nevada-based judges that we typically have. It's always great. No one really appreciates it except I think probably the 3 people on this call and maybe the officials out there and maybe some other people who really get it. But it's so much better than when they go to Texas or when they go to Georgia, which we've seen, with PFL going there the last 3 weekends. And then at least one weekend they had Derek Cleary there because he's a local, and that was fantastic. But, of course, he was in Vegas this past weekend, so we didn't actually have him at the PFL again. Fortunately, we only got one fighter who got robbed in Georgia. So at least there was that. But, that wasn't this weekend. It was previously. So it's always nice to see Nevada. There are other fights that... I will start with you, Dan, because I bet you there's a lot of fights that we didn't even list that Spencer's going to name check. But what about you?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I am interested in Said Nurmagomedov versus Douglas Silva de Andrade. I think they both were on the same card last time. Both got submission victories, I believe, versus Morozov and then versus Stamen. So I'm kind of like to see where this goes. I do think Nurmagomedov gets the win, though.
It's hard to bet against anyone named Nurmagomedov because they have a very high record. I looked this up one time on Tapology, and I think everyone named Nurmagomedov has like a cumulative 90 win percentage or something like that. It's pretty remarkable. At least the ones that are and actually I think it goes up even more if you just knock off the ones who had fought less than 5 times or something. If it's anyone who's actually put some serious effort into engaging with their career and going further, it's just ridiculous how few times anyone named Nurmagomedov loses. So yeah, I have no pick here, but shoot, if you're a bettor and you're saying, oh, I think Douglas Silva de Andrade is the one here, just put your money away. Just sit it out and watch. Just don't bet it. Just have fun. I'm actually interested though in the women's flyweight fight, Cynthia Calvillo and Nina Nunes, because there's some there's at least some chance that one of these women could maybe pick up enough steam to get up to the point of fighting Valentina Shevchenko down the road, because a lot of people have, and a lot of people lost to her. So they're always going to be looking for fresh women for Valentina Shevchenko to send back into the rankings. Say, I'll try again next time. So, and no, not that I'm writing any of them off right now. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I'm just saying there's a lot of tried and failed to beat Valentina Shevchenko. As much as people thought Tyler Santos put up a great fight last fight, and she did. She didn't win. Anyone who sit there thinks that she won the fight, the right woman won.
I think Sean Sheehan coined a term for that, expectancy bias. I think that's something similar.
I've heard
to
that
what he
before.
said.
I don't know that he's the only one who said that, but yeah.
Yeah, something like she just exceeded expectations versus Valentina, so obviously she won.
There's a lot of that happens,
Yeah.
I think, in these fights. I think that happened to a high degree in the first Figueiredo Moreno fight. I think a lot of people sat there and said, "Oh, look at Brandon Moreno. Like, we thought he was going to get crushed." And he goes out there, and I think he won. But we've gone over that fight. I think it's much easier to give 3 rounds pretty clearly to Figueiredo. And obviously he lost a point, so like if anything, it might have been a draw. But I do think the better fighter in that fight was most definitely Figueiredo when you go by 3 round, 5 round increments of scoring them, right?
A quadrillion that should have never been a rematch.
And yet it was still fun. Like,
Yeah.
I can't hate on it as much as I do think it really shouldn't have been more than one fight. It really should have just been one fight. And sure enough, I mean, look, he fouled. It's his own fault.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't foul, different fight.
Yep.
But it is what it is. I think we kind of dumb lucked into a good
Yeah.
quadrilogy, right? I think
Yeah.
that's probably much how it is. What are you, Spence? You got anything else you want to shout out as far as fights on this event before we kind of close out?
I mean, both of those are definitely on my list. Interested to see what Kyle Bohayo looks like in his second appearance. Had a good performance last time out until he, illegally kneed a dude in the head.
Which you can't do.
Yeah.
So let's see if he can keep that holstered this time around. The Ronnie Lawrence Saeed Kakramanov fight is one I'm interested in. That opens the show. 2 bantamweights, young guys, got good wins in their early performances. And then I'm not 100% sure that it's actually happening. It's still, Wikipedia's got it as a announced bout. Tapology has it as canceled, but I've written about it, so I'm banking on it happening. And that's David Onama and Austin Lingo. I think David Onama is somebody to watch at featherweight. He looked great in his debut. It was a loss to Mason Jones, but it was up a division. And then he knocked out Mowgli Benitez last time out. So he's a guy from that glory camp that I'm paying close attention to, along with El Jefe Jeff Molina. So hopefully that happens. 2 good camps, 2 good young fighters on good winning streaks. So if that one happens, I want to see it.
I want to ask you an inside baseball question here, Spencer, because obviously you talk to fighters probably more often than I do, even because that's like literally everything that you kind of do for your media career, whereas I also have other responsibilities with the New York Post, so I think you get in more. But I know this has happened to you. You interview a fighter, you got a whole interview in the can, you're excited to write something up, fight's canceled. What goes through your head when you find out about that? Like, you're just like, did this all go to waste or what? Like, what do you do?
So it depends how close to the event the fight is canceled. That certainly changes my feeling. If it is if it's the start of fight week, then I don't care because it's already been filed. And once it's filed, my job's done.
Well, yeah.
And I just send the note that says, "You got that, right?" with a little winky emoji. That means I'd like my pay, please. But most of the time, I'll just file it away. I mean, I talked to Kevin Holland for a really great interview before the London show in 2020 that got canceled because of the pandemic. And that's just one that
no one will ever hear except
you. It's left between me and Kevin Holland.
Yep.
And so I reference it from time to time because we talked about all of the things that have continued to be Kevin Holland things, like talking to guys in the cage and, needing to focus, but that's just who I am. And I want to go back to being trailblazer and not being loudmouth and blah, 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 blah. Would have been a great story. Didn't happen. And so for the most part, it's the cost of doing business, but it certainly sucks, right? Like, especially if it's somebody that you have a hard time tracking down or that you just happen to have that great interview with. You get a great conversation going. You find some nuggets that are going to really blow up the story and make it be a really interesting piece. And then the fight falls apart. It's happened a few times lately, but
well, especially
it's
in
just the way
COVID
it
times,
goes.
right? I had a similar situation happen. It was because of COVID. It happened the day after we spoke, and that was Alexander Volkanovski last year. We spoke probably 12 hours before he found out he had COVID, and that fight was canceled, which led to, of course, him being on The Ultimate Fighter with Brian Ortega. And the time we talked at that point, he and Brian Ortega were totally cool. They hadn't been on the show together, so he's like, "Oh yeah, no, we got along great, mate. I saw him at the bar, and we got along just fine." And that's my bad Australian accent, of course, but everything changed in the interim. So at least there was like a way to salvage it in the sense that it was like, okay, I know what you felt about him before, and now I know how you felt after. So we did have a little bit there, but it was like, man, I did this interview with the featherweight champion, and no one's ever going to hear it. It was like, well, it's not that I wasted my time. And I'm like, damn, no one's going to see.
The one tip I will give people that are in the industry, if you're starting out and you're listening to this and you tips for these situations, this is why you don't make your stories about the actual fight itself or the person they're fighting.
It's true.
Tell the story about the fighter, because regardless of what happens, you're just talking about that athlete. Rafael dos Anjos coming up this weekend is a perfect example. He was supposed to fight Fiziev in March. Great conversation about moving back to Brazil and coming back after a long layoff. Fight week, 2 weeks before the fight, Fiziev is out. In comes Moicano. All of my content is still usable. All of my call is still usable. We just changed the names of the people he's fighting. You still deliver a good piece. So don't make it about what does this guy do that you're worried about. Give me all your trash talk about this guy. Focus on the athlete you are speaking to and tell a story about them going into that fight so that if something changes, you don't burn an entire interview.
That is absolutely great advice, and I more or less utilized that in another one it ties in was my Jim Miller Q&A that I had run last week for the Post in my post-fight interview series that involves some questions about Bobby Green. 2 days later, Bobby Green's out, so it's like, all right, well, those ones are just going to go in the trash. He'll never know. No one will know anything that we had to say, but we had so much else to talk about because I've known Jim for, a dozen years. There were a lot of other things we could talk. And Jim is, Spencer, and Dan, he likes to talk. He's got a lot of things to say. He doesn't mind letting his words spill out. And, it's not that he's going to overshare, but he'll answer your question very thoroughly.
Yeah, I've had some 25, 30-minute conversations with Jim Miller that are literally like, it starts with, hey, man, how are you? And then it's just, away we go.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's a conversation as opposed to pulling teeth or an interview or anything like that. It's just a dude that enjoys talking about his career and another guy from Canada that enjoys listening to him talk about his career.
Yes, indeed. All right. I think probably that's all we kind of have, Dan. But real quick, Spencer, why don't you just shout out again your social handle and your main projects real quick.
Social handle is at Spencer Kyte on both Twitter and Instagram. Everything will be up on both of those platforms. You can follow me on the Keyboard Kimura newsletter, spencerkyte.substack.com. New stuff out literally every day. Doing some podcasts, doing some video stuff. I'll give Dan a video main event breakdown this week because it's a pretty easy light week otherwise. So we'll do some video on Friday for you, Dan.
Nice.
Because you roll out those punch drunk prediction parlays. Sorry we didn't get it this week. I blame Sean O'Malley.
Well, no, that one just void. That got voided.
That one just voids. That's
yeah,
it was my poor pick of Sean Strickland then. But yeah, that's the spot. I appreciate you guys having me, and we'll have to do it again.
Always a pleasure.
All right, thank you. That does it for this episode of the Couchside Judges. Once again, thanks to Spencer Kyte for joining us. We will be back again on Monday.
We will. We won't have Spencer with us. We're not going to have any guests, but hopefully I'll have fun anyway. And maybe we'll have some judging craziness. Who the heck knows?
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.